Well, good evening. I assume since the room got really, really quiet that everybody was ready to start. So thanks everyone for coming tonight. I'm just gonna read a few public comment guidelines before we get started. So in order to ensure that those wishing to comment are heard and afforded the same opportunity to speak, we ask that everyone be mindful of the following. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person. And we do have timers on the screens. You'll see them go green, yellow, and then red. So just to be mindful of that, people wishing to speak will be allowed to do so one time. Please refrain from repeating the same comments that other speakers before you may have communicated. And if you do not wish to address the commission or you have additional comments, please feel free to submit them in writing to the city clerk. Other important information and reminders, the purpose of the meeting tonight is for the commission to listen to comments from the public on the topic of ranked choice voting. So no further discussion will take place tonight, and the commission will not be voting or making any formal decisions at this meeting. The Charter Commission's next meeting will be on March 13th, 2018 at 5:30 p.m. in the City Council chambers. This meeting will also be broadcast live on Park TV, Channel 17. So once again, thank you all for coming tonight, and I am going to start inviting folks up. Once you come up to the microphone, if you'll please state your name and your address for the record, that would be terrific. So we're going to start with John Olson.
I don't know, is this on? Okay. My name is John Olson. I live at 2829 Yosemite Avenue South in St. Louis Park. I've been a resident of St. Louis Park for 59 years. And I have to leave a little bit early from this meeting because I have a board meeting I have to attend to at the Historical Society this evening. So, but I hope that the St. Louis Park makes history by adopting ranked choice voting. A good reason is more diversity in government. I'm an electrician, and I'd like to see more occupational diversity on councils and boards and things like that. For example, over at the Capitol, I believe there's only 2 blue-collar legislators. One's a plumber and one's a carpenter. If we had several names on the ballot with ranked choice voting in a general election, we'd be more apt to take a chance on a woman, a minority, or someone who works with their hands. As an electrician, I'd like to see this more representation for people like me. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I forgot, yes. Sorry, Jean. I understood you had a video that you wanted to show the
Excuse me, that had my error in trying to call it up right now with a mistake.
Yeah, you can come up now if you would like.
Oh.
Sorry, we were planning on having you.
Do that to prompt me into someone.
No, it just reminded me.
Total error. You want me to come up now?
If you would like to, please do.
Members of the commission, my apologies for that, and to John Olson. So I'd like to use my time. I'm Jean Massey. I'm the Executive Director of Fair Vote Minnesota. You all have had an opportunity to hear from me during the Q&A a few weeks ago, so I don't need to add to that commentary. But I would like to take the opportunity to do 2 things. One, read a letter from the City of Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Fry, and then show a video of voters' experience in the City of Minneapolis in 2017. So let me read this letter, and then if you could just put on the video, and that would be my testimony. Thank you. From the City of Minneapolis, Mayor Jacob Fry. To whom it may concern, as the newly elected mayor of Minneapolis, I'm proud that our progressive city has been using ranked choice voting here since 2009. We've eliminated the old, expensive, and low turnout primary process in favor of RCV, which enables robust competition and discourages negative campaign tactics. The election in November 2017 was another example of what we do best: put feet to our democracy by turning out in record numbers at the polls. In fact, more than 104,000 voters casting ballots. We had among our highest voter turnout in more than 20 years. I'm confident that RCV was a major factor because it helped to make possible a highly diverse slate of candidates whose campaigns promoted civil discourse, focused on a range of critical issues facing our city. And for anyone who underestimates the ability of voters to understand ranked choice voting, let me dispel your concerns. Nearly 90% of voters ranked their ballot in the Minneapolis mayoral race. With RCV, voters were fully able to support the candidate they most believed in, while still indicating other candidates that also would be acceptable mayoral choices. I was honored to be elected with majority support thanks to RCV, and I'm glad Minneapolis voters know I will work to represent all of their interests as mayor. Sincerely, Jacob Fry, Minneapolis Mayor. Thank you.
I did rank my choices.
I ranked it and it was really easy to do.
It was pretty easy.
There was nothing that was challenging about ranked choice voting.
It was very clear how to rank my choices and which candidates were available to me.
There's been a lot of education about it, so I really knew what to do.
I gave one to the people that I really want them to win, and then I gave second the people that I really want them. If my person didn't get it, the next person I wanted to get that vote.
I've been following this election, and I was able to put down the candidates that I thought were best going to serve Minneapolis.
It gives you more option. It makes you think about who do you want to choose first, who you want to choose second, and why.
I think it made it more thoughtful for me.
It caused a little bit more thought.
It allows me to vote my conscience first, and then my slightly more electable conscience second.
You're able to actually choose your first choice, even if it's a reach.
Ranked choice voting did change the way that I voted. I was able to vote with my heart, my head, and my gut, whereas usually I would just have to vote with my head.
It allows you more choice because often, your first choice in candidate isn't always necessarily going to win.
With ranked choice voting, you can make your voice heard across all of the candidates that you know you could support in greater or lesser degrees.
The ballot is a lot different than it would have been. There would have been a Republican, a Democrat, and whatever else. And in this case, we're not voting for a party, we're voting for a person.
It's not just a one or nothing kind of thing.
It's a little more nuanced, is what I'm trying to say, than just a simple vote for this or that.
Well, I like that the candidates have to really appeal to people beyond just their base.
They seem to talk about things in a constructive fashion.
Dare I say it, it injects a little bit of positivity into the race.
I get to support candidates that support different values that I have as an individual.
New ideas can be presented that couldn't be presented if you had to get a quorum in a convention or something.
It's much more efficient. Okay. You don't have to do primaries, right? It's very practical.
It just feels like you have more choices and a better way to affect the actual outcome.
It feels like you're having a bit more say.
I want to make a difference locally, and this is how I can do it.
I think it'd be a good idea everywhere. That's what I'd like to see.
Yeah, I mean, even nationally, federally, that would be great to give third-party candidates a better shot.
Absolutely. Give everybody a choice. Give them opportunity.
All right, Dorothy Doyle.
Hi, my name is Dorothy Doyle, and I live at 3041 Maryland Avenue South. I was going to say it's right by the little park and ride on Minnetonka in Louisiana. I'll make 2 brief points. First, an election is really just a hiring decision made by a lot of people with diverse perspectives and interests. And ranked choice voting is better than winner-take-all because it gleans the collective wisdom of the voters. Sometimes in a PowerPoint presentation, attendees answer a multiple-choice question using a clicker. Answers show up as colored bars on the screen. You may have noticed that even in a pre-test, the majority of attendees usually get the right answer. It's like polling the audience in a game show, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? The book, The Wisdom of Crowds by James Surowiecki, describes this statistical experiment where 800 people guessed the weight of an ox. While the guesses varied widely, the statistical average was almost exactly equal to the actual weight. Similarly, when voters can rank, it's like finding an average score among the voters for each candidate. Certainly, other citizens have more information about some of the candidates and their policies than I do, and vice versa. Together we can make a good decision as we can give weight to our votes. Second, ranked choice voting encourages consideration of complexity and nuance. Anyone involved in governing knows that the devil is in the details. RCV acknowledges that there are more than just two diametrically opposed potential solutions to a problem. We need to get out of the binary paradigm that is causing the gridlock and dysfunction in government. Governing is not just about right and left or up or down or winners or losers. It should not be a tug of war. Granted, binary thinking is way less of a problem in St. Louis Park with nonpartisan elections and an engaged, civic-minded, and well-educated populace. But we can take a lead, make better selections ourselves, govern even more effectively, and serve as a model and trailblazer for the rest of the state, and dare I hope, the rest of the country. Thanks for listening, and I hope you let me vote my heart.
Andrea Larson.
First, thank you for letting us all speak tonight about something that's important to all of us. My name is Andy, or Andrea Larson. I live at 2831 Huntington. My husband and I made our home in St. Louis Park in 1988, raised 2 daughters, and very much are committed to this wonderful community. I'm strongly supportive of the ranked choice voting for many reasons. People before me have articulated some of those very eloquently. In addition, I want to make sure I can say that I think we're at a time in our history when people are deeply concerned about government. And I think there is an awakening to how people can become better citizens. And I think ranked choice voting really provides people with a way to be more committed to this very sacred duty as a citizen to vote. I think that we could use this system of voting to be more thoughtful about our candidates, and in turn our candidates would certainly be more prone and more promised to be thoughtful and eloquent about their positions. We live in a period of time when there is such vitriol and rancor. I think citizens are looking for candidates that do not reflect the extreme positions of our times. We want and need leaders who can bridge the ideological divide that keeps us all so distracted from finding and implementing solutions to real and serious problems. Ranked choice voting allows people to be more thoughtful about who they select, and it encourages the candidates to be more detailed in their answers and to work hard to bridge across the divides that are sometimes there. I think we need candidates who are deeply committed to being good stewards of finite and valuable resources. And I think it's a wonderful way to think and consider how we raise young people, people that will be voting soon, to be more committed and invested in the process. Thanks.
Elizabeth Glidden.
Good evening. My name is Elizabeth Glidden. I reside at 4006 Blaisdell in Minneapolis. I'm here to share some of my perspective as a resident in Minneapolis that has experienced ranked choice voting, as a candidate who has run under ranked choice voting in at least 2 elections, and as a council member for 12 years for the city of Minneapolis, including during the time within which we decided to adopt ranked choice voting and implement it. Let me be clear, I'm here as a fan of ranked choice voting. I'm not a neutral observer. I was first attracted to it because I was ashamed at how low our participation was in primaries, which is not unique to the history of Minneapolis. But I wanted to highlight for you a little bit about administration and implementation. And that's because I'm really proud of our elections officials in our city of Minneapolis. I have to admit that we had a lot of trepidation in Minneapolis, despite wanting this new system, of what would it be like to implement something new that's going to touch every voter in the city. And I think the big story has been that there hasn't been a big story about process and how our elections officials administered this work. There's been a lot of questions about candidates. There's been a lot of questions about speculation about who would win under these systems, but the story hasn't been about administration. And I just share that because I think we have experts in the state of Minnesota, not just in Minneapolis, but also in St. Paul, who are ready with good systems to share with you and to be able to help you in any way that you would desire. Ranked choice voting is now part of the living history of Minneapolis. I feel like we are seeing changes before our very eyes in who participates in voting, as well as the candidates that participate. As people know, we had just out-of-sight participation in Minneapolis in our 2017 elections, closer to a gubernatorial election year. And we had more candidates of color and women than we have seen, I think, ever in the city of Minneapolis. We know people understand ranked choice voting, not just because we've asked a few people, but because we've done surveys both before and after elections multiple times. We also know that people have ranked their ballots. They want to participate, and I think the best example of this was part of our 2017 mayoral race, where people feel they have good choices, they rank their candidates. Thanks for allowing me to speak and share my opinions with you.
Judith Kook.
Good evening. I'm Judith Kook. I live at 4010 Highwood Road in St. Louis Park, and I've lived there since 1991. I just have 3 points to make here, and one, that ranked choice voting is easy to use. Every segment of our population in St. Louis Park will be able to understand that, because we've been ranking and choosing all our lives. We go to get an ice cream cone, and we got 26 choices, and we quickly choose the ones we like best, have a few tastes, and then we rank them, and then we make a choice, maybe a second choice. Maybe we get 2 scoops, so then we have a second choice. And I think people are eager to do this. We've been talking about it, ranked choice voting, for a long time, and I've been an election judge for several years, and at the last election, people came in and said, okay, how many do I get to vote for? Oh, only one this time, only one, but we're working on it. The second issue is, do you want a majority or a plurality? Since elementary school, we've been learning that the majority rules. Are we going to have to learn something new, that a plurality rules? No, I don't think that's going to go. I think we understand the majority rules. We're accepting of that. But I don't know how accepting the voters would be of just a plurality ruling. And secondly, I have heard some talk about referendums. This does not need to go to a referendum. I don't think you want it to go to a referendum. That would just be opening up a slippery slope of referendums where the citizens would begin to demand that there be a referendum on everything, on the money that you spend at the nature center, sidewalks, bicycle lanes. I don't know. We don't want to have referendums on everything. So I hope that you will all recommend to the City Council to accept ranked choice voting with no strings attached. Thank you for your time.
Scott Peterson.
Scott Peterson, 3716 Colorado Avenue South. And not to be hyperbolic, but I find ranked choice voting to be a dream come true. I remember when I first voted in the 2000 election, that was the first election I could vote, and learning about the fact that I would have to, I like that comment, vote with my head versus vote with my heart. I really like the idea of being able to vote for the one person that you believe in, not the one that you think is most likely to win. And I also think this is I would like to vote ranked choice for all sorts of national election, state election, and I think that starting with this local and seeing this local ranked choice voting spreading, my hope is that that's going to, that concept of voting with your feet, we're making it possible for the county to buy more equipment by showing interest in ranked choice voting, and then that shows the voting machine companies that there's interest in ranked choice voting. So by by St. Louis Park getting involved with this now, my hope is that that will spread, and not only to other suburbs besides Minneapolis, St. Paul, maybe eventually to state elections and national elections. Thank you.
Elaine Saavik.
Good evening. I'm Elaine Saavik. I live at 7708 West 13 and 1/2 Street, only in St. Louis Park. I've lived in St. Louis Park since 1979. By choice. My husband and I chose to move here. I've been an election judge for many years, pretty involved in the community, and I really care a lot about what happens here. And I'm very excited about ranked choice voting. I sincerely hope that the city does adopt it. I'm convinced that it will inspire more voters to go to the polls. I've been following this issue, attended the presentation here a few weeks ago, which was just an incredible panel that was put together. I don't know who did it, but you did a great job. Everyone had a lot of positive information to share. I was particularly impressed with Professor David Schultz, who is pretty well known around the area for people who follow public affairs. He made a lot of points that really should have eliminated any doubt just at that point that night. He said that ranked choice voting increases voter turnout. Certainly in Minneapolis and St. Paul in November, that was proven. Increasing voter turnout should be a goal for anyone who cares about representative democracy. I have worked as an election judge at primaries where we had less than 100 people. I mean, they were just, it made good sense to get rid of primaries, but ranked choice voting is a logical step to replace that process. He explained that ranked choice voting promotes electing candidates with support from a majority of voters. You're going to be hearing majority a lot tonight. If voters realize that whoever is elected will really win with majority support, I think that more people, again, will be participating and more people will run for office. And then he also talked about how ranked choice voting reduces the need for vote splitting or the spoiler effect, allowing voters to vote their conscience, but also allowing them to indicate who they prefer if their first candidate cannot achieve majority support. So they actually still have something in the game. It's going to only be a good thing. More people are participating in our elections, more views are being heard and respected. St. Louis Park is a great city. I believe ranked choice voting will make it even better. Please recommend it to the council. Thank you.
Zaylor Stout.
Good evening. My name is Zaylor Stout. I live at 4942 in 6th Street in Minneapolis. I'm a former resident of St. Louis Park, former city council candidate, former Human Rights Commission member here. The phrase "one man, one vote" was used by advocates who have advocated for political equality throughout various election reforms such as universal suffrage, proportional representation, the elimination of plurality voting, malappropriation, and gerrymandering. In 1880, it was used by the Brits during a trade union dispute, and 100 years later was used by people fighting against apartheid against the South African government. In 1960, "one person, one vote" was used in a series of legal cases here in the United States relating to equal representation in state congressional districts, and now I invoke it here for equality in St. Louis Park. Our electoral process has evolved over time and will continue to evolve in the future. African Americans weren't eligible to vote here in the United States until 1870. Women weren't eligible to vote here until 1919 with the passage of the 19th Amendment. But as we've learned since then, the right to vote means nothing without equal access to vote, without a diverse array of candidates to vote for, and without the integrity of our electoral system. Though my bid for City Council was unsuccessful, I hope that my candidacy is able to inspire other diverse candidates from other backgrounds to run in the future. But their success may rest in your hands today, because future candidates who look like me may not be able to campaign that they have, been a resident of St. Louis Park because they were able to buy their grandparents' home, or that they were a resident of St. Louis Park for 25 years, or that they're third-generation St. Louis Park residents. Why is that? Because of a practice called redlining that was alive and well here in the Twin Cities and the metropolitan area. Some of the texts in your very own deeds for your homes may still indicate and prohibit selling or renting to people of Chinese, Japanese, Moorish, Turkish, Negro, Mongolian, or African blood or descent. This was an active practice through 1946, and that was not that long ago. It's important to understand how our city came to look the way that it does demographically. A well-meaning question was asked of the expert panel a few weeks ago here, and the question was, what problem do we have to solve here? Professor Schultz responded, I think his response, I believe, was on point when he said, ranked choice voting is a question of values. Start with the problem that you have and that you're trying to solve, and what are the policy options that are available to you to solve this? During his testimony, he also indicated that ranked choice voting helps counteract the spoiler effect and gives voters a more opportunity to choose better candidates and provides an opportunity for more candidates to run. My position is that ranked choice voting counteracts systemic inequalities in our voting system that frequently disenfranchises or discourages minorities from either participating in the electoral process as candidates or as voters. Thriving democracies evolve over time. How can we claim to become a more perfect union if we lack the courage to enact the change necessary to get there? A failure to act on an important reform like this means that our city is just giving lip service to the important issues of equity and equality that it's championed in other areas of our government. Our city's government needs to reflect the community that it is tasked to represent, and in my view, it is an important step forward by making this aspiration a reality by passing this.
Sue Sanger.
Hi, Sue Sanger, 4717 West 28th Street. I initiated the City Council discussion of ranked choice voting several years ago because I was impressed that it incents candidates to reach out and to connect with more voters. With a traditional voting system, a candidate typically identifies his or her base of supporters and then works hard to get them to show up to vote. That is the usual advice given to candidates, and that is how I did it in my 6 elections for the City Council. With ranked choice voting, candidates have to reach out to a wider range of voters to try to get those voters to select him or her as their second choice, if not their first choice candidate. Excuse me. This means that more voters have greater contact and opportunities to interact with and to get to know who the candidates are, more opportunities to ask questions and provide feedback to the candidates, and thus they have more information upon which to make a more informed decision and choice at the polls. And it also means that from the candidate's perspective, the candidate hears a wider variety of voters' opinions and questions, and which hopefully shape the candidate's policy positions. Of course, this also means that the candidate must spend more time reaching out to more potential voters, which is, of course, why some established politicians don't really love ranked choice voting. Finally, using a traditional voting system in a winner-take-all election, as St. Louis Park will do if ranked choice voting is not approved this year, will mean that the winner in a multi-candidate election will not necessarily have 50% of the voters, the support of 50% of the voters. using ranked choice voting means that the winner will indeed have majority support and thus more buy-in from a greater segment of our residents. So I urge you to recommend that the City Council adopt ranked choice voting this year. Thank you.
Shelly Colvin.
My name is Shelly Colvin. I live at 2811 Aquila Avenue South. I am for ranked choice voting. In my mind, we've heard various reasons and opinions. I ditto most of them, all of them. So I want to be just short and sweet in the sense that I have seen in the past in elections, I've lived various places where you have one issue candidates that gather the folks around that one issue. And when with primaries, which we have gotten rid of, and we've decided that was too costly, it could be hijacked an election. If everybody is at the election that cares, that have done their research, the second choice can be made by that large group of people, and not just a group that's pulled together for a one issue. Thank you.
Roger Cruz.
My name is Roger Cruz. I live at 3953 Zenwood, St. Louis Park. I am not a fan of ranked choice voting. It is a bad idea. Ranked choice voting does not promote a diversity of thought. I prefer diversity of thought. It does not promote it. What ranked choice voting promotes is the general current consensus of thought. That's what it promotes. It does not promote a diverse thought. In fact, what happens is that someone with a diverse thinking process ends up being on the bottom of the choices, and they're the first ones to be eliminated. They rarely ever get to the top where ranked choice voting can even help them. It does not promote diverse thought. The second thing is that it is more expensive to use a ranked choice voting process than what we have. We've heard that, oh, it's a lot cheaper. No, it's not. In the city, possibly with the exception of a city, it may be cheaper. But for county, for state, and for national elections, it is more expensive. Votes cannot be counted at the precinct level in an RCV process. They must be carefully and securely transported to a central location where someone has to count them, has to put them into the computer, and then the computer tells us who the winner is. That is not cheaper than having them counted at the precinct level. And by the way, it adds 2 to 3 to 4 days to the announcement of whoever the winner is. Thirdly, ranked choice voting is ripe for fraud. Because of the extensive transport and the accounting and the secured transporting of the ballots, each transfer point is an opportunity for fraud, an opportunity to stuff the ballot box. That means to either exchange a box that's out there, or to take a box away, or to add a box. I know it's illegal to do that sort of thing, but then so is murder. It can happen, and it will happen. And I believe it's happened already in the city of Minneapolis in the early 2000s. And then there's the program itself, the computer program. The system is so complicated that it cannot be done by hand. It cannot be done at the precinct level. It has to be done at a central level. It has to be done by a computer. I've been a programmer for 20 plus years, and I can assure you that I could write a program that could get my candidate elected, and you would never know it because I could cover the tracks. I don't trust the computer programs.
I have to ask you to wrap that up.
Okay. One last thought. Because of the complication of ranked choice voting, all the transportation, by extension, I ask you to imagine what it would be like for a national election where every vote from every precinct in every state would have to be sent to a central location in the country to be entered into a computer.
Susan Niz.
Hello, my name is Susan Neese. I live at 2800 Alabama Avenue South. I watched the panel of experts, and ranked choice voting speaks to me mainly for these following reasons: that it can foster diverse candidates and diverse winners. It encourages non-traditional candidates, newcomers, and underdogs to run, and it creates more opportunities for them to win. And it also promotes a sense of engagement and increases turnout. I was involved in St. Louis Park's election last year in terms of citizen engagement and hosting Q&A forums via the Allies of St. Louis Park. And so my 2 cents to add to the experts, and it may sound cynical, but I think it's realistic, is that inclusion, diversity, and engagement will not increase by all the talking and all the good intentions in the world. And St. Louis Park talks a lot about these values. But until we have systems in place, in this case, a voting method, inclusion, diversity, and engagement will continue to be just what we talk about and not what we do. And this is why I support ranked choice voting. Thank you.
Suzanne Wilhite.
Hello, my name is Suzanne Wilhite. My home address is 3905 Glenhurst Avenue South, and I've lived in St. Louis Park now for 20 years. And I'm very proud of being involved with this community, very engaged citizens. It's like a little town in this big city. Having come from a little town, that was odd to me, but great engagement with citizens. And I support ranked choice voting in St. Louis Park for several reasons. Many of them are on this card as I read through this. I'm in agreement with these. I also support ranked choice voting for state and national elections. I think it engages our citizenry. I've been an election judge and here in St. Louis Park, and I see low turnouts, and I see the numbers in other locations where we have very, very low turnouts. I wish we had more people who would vote. I think having ranked choice voting gets people more engaged. I've got half of my family that don't vote. They say, why bother? My vote doesn't matter. I think ranked choice voting makes people feel like their vote does matter. And I think it also gets better agreement in terms of acceptance of those candidates when we top rank comes to the forefront because people have been involved in that ranking. So I support ranked choice voting, and I thank you for listening, and I hope that you will vote yes to support ranked choice voting in St. Louis Park.
Eileen Nicely.
My name is Ellison Nicely. I live at 8725 West 35th Street here in St. Louis Park.
I'm a longtime resident and member of the St. Louis Park League of Women Voters. As you might guess, I'm committed to making our democracy work better. That's why I'm here tonight urging you to make a positive RCV recommendation to the City Council. In a nutshell, I believe RCV is good for voters and that it is good for democracy. Local, national, and international surveys and studies point to disturbing trends in all of the world's major democratic countries. People in increasing numbers are saying that voting doesn't matter and that elected leaders do not care about what they think or want. People are becoming increasingly cynical, and a huge proportion of people between the ages of 18 to 34 told the Journal of Democracy that democracy does not work. This is deeply disturbing. But who can blame them? Many voters, and especially young voters, are turned off by the entire electoral and political process. Ranked choice voting can help turn this around, starting right here in our own city. Here are just a few of the ways that I believe RCV could be good for voters and for our democracy. Eliminating the opportunity for a small group of voters for a small group of voter to prematurely winnow the field of candidates in a low turnout early August primary. Number two, giving voters more choice and an equal voice in a single high turnout diverse election in November. Opening the political process to new voices. Promoting more diverse political representation. And increasing opportunity in traditional underrepresented communities. Thank you for your work to make our democracy better, and I hope you will encourage the City Council to approve ranked choice voting for St. Louis Park. Thank you.
Bruce Fischer.
Hello. I live at 4359 Browndale since 86. No. Yeah, 86. But my parents moved into St. Louis Park in 1948. So I've been in St. Louis Park an awfully long time. And I'm an Oriole. So I'm concerned about what happens here. And I'm in favor of ranked choice voting. I agree with almost everything I've heard tonight. And I'm not going to repeat all that stuff, but I want to leave with the idea that, well, two things. Without a primary, there presents, that opens up a problem going into the general. Ranked choice voting is also called instant runoff voting, and it really could be seen as combining a general and a primary at the same time. And you get a 2-for-1. So without a primary and going into the general right now with a winner-take-all, there's a potential problem down there that other people have discussed. Secondly, looking into the future, if there is ranked choice voting and how it's presented in 10 years, our children, the people who are growing up and becoming voters, who will probably find the relationship with the candidate to be a lot different than it is today, and it'll be more complicated in some ways and simplified in other ways. In that relationships will have to be formed, new ones will have to be formed with that are positive between the candidate and the voter. So that's really what I have to say. Most everybody has said what I was going to say. I'll leave with the idea that don't want to have to go with the old slogan, lesser of two evils. I'm tired of that, and I hope St. Louis Park comes away with ranked choice voting. Thank you.
Rod Harris.
Rod Harris, 2205 Quebec Avenue South. The people in this community who know best the rest of the community are probably the elected officials. And they don't really have to work very hard at knowing what's going on because citizens tend to let them know right away. I think they were foresightful when they voted to eliminate the primary for several reasons. In the recent election for city council members, there was a diverse candidacy, and I think it was universal that they all supported ranked choice voting. And they've been out door knocking, listening to what people had to say to them about everything. And if they had heard that the citizens in the community did not like the idea, they wouldn't have been so supportive of it themselves. I'd say, let's do it. And let's not just take it for granted when we do it, though. Let's keep our eye on it. Let's watch it. Let's study it. See if it really works as we hope it does. And if it works in Minneapolis, I think it can work here. We're probably as smart as they are. But, thank you.
Olaf Jorgenson.
Hi, I'm Olaf Jorgenson, 2737 Alabama Avenue South. I also came to the roundtable, and right near the end, Mr. Beckstrand actually asked a question of the panel along the lines of, St. Louis Park is a much smaller municipality, and ranked choice voting would only apply for municipal elections. We are not very likely to have a 6-candidate, hotly contested mayoral race. What benefit is there to us to undergo the expense and the trouble of implementing ranked choice voting? And I was actually taken aback at that time I'm a supporter of ranked choice voting. I was taken aback by how little response I had to that question. I really had to think about it a little bit, and I thought it was a sharp question to ask. And in response, I had my month to think about it now. I would like to say I really have 2 points, one of them sort of esoteric. I think you can see that the citizens of St. Louis Park want ranked choice voting, and we are asking you to amplify our voices. We can scream out into the void on Facebook all we want, but without actual official action, our voices are muted, and we need your recommendation to the City Council to amplify our voice. And then secondly, on a more practical level, I'm actually a Ward 1 voter, so we had an open seat for City Council in a primary this year. And in my opinion, or last election cycle, not this year, but last election cycle, in my opinion, ranked choice voting would not have changed the outcome of that election. I think the candidate that won would have won no matter what. But I do think it would have changed the order of finish in the 2 and 3 spots, just based on the community members that I know, the support I heard. And you might ask, why would that matter? Who cares who finishes second and who finishes third? I think when you look at younger folks running for office, diverse folks running for office, when they look and say, yeah, maybe someone who's lived here for 30 years and has deep roots in the community defeated me, but I did finish second instead of divided support and losing in a primary and not even being on the general election ballot, it may encourage quality candidates to continue to seek office. And it will also actually put those quality candidates on the election ballot on election day, they would stand a chance to, in fact, win those seats from time to time, should they run a quality campaign. Thank you for your time.
Katherine Gray.
Good evening. So my name is Katherine Gray. I am a resident of St. Louis Park. I'm in Ward 1 as well. I live at 2700 France Avenue South, so I'm on the fringe of St. Louis Park. I am, by my work is at the Minneapolis Foundation, and at the Minneapolis Foundation I am tasked with advancing equity, closing disparities through civic engagement strategies. And so one of those strategies has been increasing voter turnout. And what I'm here to tell you that I believe, and I actually don't, it's beyond my belief, I mean, I have data that is backing this up, that ranked choice voting is really a big part of why Minneapolis is succeeding in increasing the voter turnout, especially in communities that historically have been 20 to 40 percentage points less in turnout than other parts of the city. So we've started doing this in 2013 with this particular strategy, and have had a chance this last election to really look at what happened in that same type of election 4 years later. So I can tell you that this is more than that ranked choice voting has been a key in this. And I've just been reading final reports that you get when you give out grants and you get them back, you get back final reports, and ranked choice voting in these voter engagement grants was mentioned good 75% of the time in the final report. So in my role at the foundation, I want to let you know that I'm especially grateful to Fair Vote Minnesota for the education and for the surveying that they have done over these last two elections specifically, as well as in other areas, in St. Paul as well, but especially in Minneapolis. I'd say that they have played a really important role partnering with the city in educating voters about this system. And I hear over and over again, which we saw it in the video, that it is not a barrier. And I can tell you there's a lot of barriers to voting. There are other things that we could be thinking about, but ranked choice voting has been one of those things to help to address those barriers. I think that as the St. Louis Park population grows and diversifies, that this really gives us an opportunity, some folks have mentioned it, to walk our talk, to not simply say we want to welcome folks and have people's have everybody's voices heard. This gives us a way to do that in a much deeper way. So for these reasons and others, many of what we've heard, I do support ranked choice voting. I ask you to move this forward and to see St. Louis Park adopt it, and to do so without further delay in terms of a referendum or any other strategy. I think we have the power to do it with the system here that we've got to move it forward without any further delay. Thank you very much.
Philippe Cunningham.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Philippe Cunningham, and I am the Minneapolis City Council member representing the 4th Ward in North Minneapolis. So I live in the McKinley neighborhood. I wanted to take a moment tonight as somebody who has lived through ranked choice voting and actually ran against a 20-year incumbent, being able to talk about that experience firsthand. So one of the things that that's really clear about ranked choice voting is that it really fosters that diversity in candidates that are running and winning. In Minneapolis, 18 out of the 22 races were competitive that had women and people of color, and 12 won. So that was a really exciting time, and I was one of them. It was a really exciting time to be able to be a part of that process and see it really come to fruition. I actually am the first person of color to represent the 4th Ward in North Minneapolis, which has been majority minority for quite some time. And so that's why this matters, which, by the way, I should mention that it was announced early the next day. It had to move over into 2nd and 3rd round votes, but it was very expeditious. So I would recommend checking out the City of Minneapolis Elections Department. They did a great job. Additionally, so Ward 4 in North Minneapolis, generally speaking, has had historically the lowest voter turnout rate in North Minneapolis, in general speaking, North Minneapolis. And we saw a 25% increase in voters in this last election, which really broke the myth that low-income folks of color and young folks can't be engaged to vote. Additionally, from my firsthand experience, what I experienced was that I got to build power in new ways that I had not even really considered before in stepping into this race. It was much less divisive. I was able to show up with integrity and continue to operate and demonstrate the kind of council member that I would be, because I showed up, things never got negative. I was able to stay positive and build relationships across the bases. So there were 3 folks in my race, the incumbent and another progressive person of color, and I was able to build relationships with folks across all 3 of those bases, because I was able to say, will you consider me for your second choice? Will you consider me for your third choice? And so that began a new kind of opening that had maybe not been considered before. I also want to just say that in Ward 3, there was a candidate, Samantha Priest-Stinson, who she probably would have been eliminated early in the race, but because of the fact she had such a strong race, I actually was able to hire her into my office, and so be able to see her and be a fan of her. I really hope that you will recommend your city council to move forward with this, because it's an opportunity to shift your local political discourse and paradigm away from this very divisive rhetoric that we're seeing on the national scale to a more local, community building, collaborative culture. So thank you, everybody.
Julia Davis.
I'm Julia Davis. I live at 2810 Zenwood Avenue South. My husband and I chose St. Louis Park in 1985. I heard about it all my life. I come from Roseville. So I'm delighted to be here, and I'm very proud of the city. I think you have the letter that I wrote in support of ranked choice voting, submitted earlier this year, in which I enumerated my arguments in support of ranked choice voting. I'm not going to repeat that. Other people have been extremely eloquent in support of this concept. What I wanted to do is just say I also had the pleasure of attending last month's panel discussion about ranked choice voting in front of this commission. I was really impressed both by the questions and by the answers, and by the intention given to how to fund and implement the change to ranked choice. I understand that the increased time in administration and tallying and assigning votes may mean more administrative processing, but I urge the commissioners to balance the potential costs against the future benefits. It is my experience, and probably all of our experience, that especially where people are concerned, be it childcare, education, health, or community, or voting, upfront investments pay huge dividends down the line. And I think it is well worth it to make the switch to ranked choice voting, and it will be a fine demonstration of our city's values. Thank you very much.
Karl Gamrat.
Hi, Karl Gamrat. I live on Virginia Avenue here in St. Louis Park. I want to make a couple of points. First one, I won't belabor the issue of the community support. I think you can certainly see it in the room. It's probably also worth noting that in 10 of the 16 precinct caucuses this year at the local Senate District 46 DFL, there was a resolution passed specifically to urge them to work in St. Louis Park. That was pretty much as much, if not more, than any other resolution on any other topic in any other category, period, let alone in the local issues. Ranked choice blew everything out of the water, specifically St. Louis Park was what they mentioned. So it's important to people. It's important to a lot of people throughout the city. The second is we've talked a lot about how big of a choice it is to change the voting system. We kind of forget, or at least we're glossing over the fact that that decision has already been made. You've already eliminated the primaries, and that was a very easy thing for you to do. The thing that you wanted to do was give people more choice, and that's a great thing. And I think it's a good goal. But if you give people more choices, you don't give them more ability to choose, the extra number of people doesn't do anybody any good. As far as a lot of the concerns with ranked choice voting, whether or not we'll be able to implement it, whether or not we'll be able to understand it, be careful of the message that you send there. If you say that you don't think we can implement it, you're sending the message that the people that work on elections aren't capable of doing it. When you tell the city that you're worried about people's ability to figure out their ability to choose their first, second, and third choice, you're telling them that they're not smart enough to perform a basic mental function that we do every day when we're doing things as simple as trying to pick out what we're going to have for dinner. What's our first, second, and third choice? It's not that hard, and it won't be that hard for voting. Finally, it's fair to say that maybe ranked choice voting won't change everything. Maybe it's not going to be the sweeping change that eliminates every problem that exists in politics. It's probably not going to be. Maybe it's just one little part of one little puzzle in a really huge picture. But there's something you can be sure of. While it may not change everything if you institute ranked choice voting, if you do nothing, nothing is exactly what you'll get. Thank you.
Jim Leitner.
Hi, my name is Jim Leitner, and I live at 3128 Florida Avenue South. And I'm one of the people that Rod Harris had talked about. I was a candidate in Ward 3 this year, and door knocking, you know, I was all over, talked to residents all over my ward, and ranked choice voting is very strongly supported by the public in St. Louis Park. And I believe Winston Churchill said that democracy is the worst kind of government besides every other form of government. And I really strongly believe that. And I believe that more democracy is always better than less democracy. And after eliminating the primary system, we have a system now where possibly a candidate, a minority candidate, can be elected. So if there's 3 candidates, you can be elected with, you know, a little bit over 30% of the vote. If there's 4 candidates, you can be elected with a little bit over 25% of the vote. So I do not think that's a good system. I think that Minneapolis and St. Paul are very good reasons for ranked choice voting. It is very popular. The people there really liked it. I think it really increases positive campaigning and turnout in elections. And I think it's incredible to think about North Minneapolis having its first person of color in office in Ward 4. I think it's Ward 4 in North Minneapolis. I love North Minneapolis. I spend time there when I can. And I think that's a very good result for this election. And I think that, you know, I believe in thinking globally and acting locally. And I think that having majority candidates elected at all levels of government is a very important thing in a democracy. And I think a lot of the reasons that a lot of the problems that we see nationally right now are because the House, the Senate, the presidency, and the Supreme Court are all represented by minority voices in the U.S. government. And I don't want to see minority voices control St. Louis Park. Thank you.
Diane Steen Hinderly.
I've lived at 2829 Yosemite since 1983. I'm going to be starting with the article written by a CEO of a metro area insurance company, and his title of this is "Change is Great." The early American statesman Ben Franklin once said, "When you're finished changing, you're finished." And I'll be continuing here with 3 areas: a little bit about numbers, a little bit about civility that's often mentioned, and then a note about gender diversity. Our founding documents say that government needs the consent of the people, meaning consensus. And ranked choice voting is better at identifying the consensus winner, and better than what I call little plurality piles that are below that line of 50%. Math hadn't advanced enough in the 1700s, but from 1847 on, ranking was discovered to measure the overall will of the electorate. And we have had a math problem in St. Louis Park. We had a spoiler factor in the state representative race in 2002. Our founding documents also talk about pursuing happiness and government promoting domestic tranquility. But we need mechanisms to counteract discord and to counteract voter apathy, which has been here in the park and one reason why we eliminated primaries. And there are these structural things that we can do, like ranked choice voting, instead of just personal things, like saying be nicer or turn out for things. And I'd like to mention that my husband and I were poll watchers in Minneapolis for their 3rd ranked choice voting election last November. We were at a school behind Abbott Hospital, and the enthusiasm among the voters was just palpable, and they were from all colors of humankind. They were very excited, and I want to see that excitement in the park when they were bantering about who we were going to put second, who we were going to put third. Okay, and then I'll end here with a note regarding gender diversity. There was a media briefing in December, and I was excited about those who were inviting us to that briefing. The former mayor, Gail Dorfman, the League of Women Voters, Deb Brinkman, Fair Vote's Jeannie Massey, Sue Sanger, Ann Mavity, and I found myself shedding a tear. And that's because it reminded me of my family history and indeed our nation's history. We used to have a Wild West in America. There was lawlessness. And a commentator back then said he knew civilization was coming when he saw an upright piano in the back of a covered wagon bouncing along. Women were coming. And my own great-grandmother came in a covered wagon in 1876 to the western border of Minnesota. She started a congregation in her sod house that still exists today, not the sod house, but a wooden church. And music was huge in that home and in that church. And things like that, the arts, they're civilizing. And women will bring, and there's not enough women on all of our governing.
Diane, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap it up.
Okay. I'll just finish with that CEO statement. He said, let's get going with charging ahead with several positive changes, and RCV is one. Thank you.
Gail Dorfman.
Thank you. I'm Gail Dorfman. I live at 4200 Forest Road in St. Louis Park. Have lived there since 1988. I want to thank you for holding this listening session on ranked choice voting this evening. I'm a member of the St. Louis Park League of Women Voters, and I'm proud to be on the board of Fair Vote Minnesota, so I strongly support ranked choice voting. But I have spent my public service over many years representing the city of St. Louis Park as a city council member and as the mayor and as the Hennepin County Commissioner. And what I know about St. Louis Park is that we are a city of innovation and good government, and it's always been true. We were the first city to have curbside recycling and implementing other environmental initiatives to this day. We were the first city to have the Children First initiative, with strong support for the kids of this community and our school system. We reached out and created and supported strong neighborhood organizations in St. Louis Park. We engaged the community and developed Vision St. Louis Park, still going on to this day, and many other initiatives, up to the recent decision that the Charter Commission, the City Council made to eliminate the costly low turnout voter, the primary. And so when I look at St. Louis Park, we're a leader in the region, and ranked choice voting seems like a really good fit for St. Louis Park for all the reasons that you've heard from many other people who testified at this listening session this evening. And it's just the kind of initiative that really fits with the innovative, good government DNA of St. Louis Park. Thanks for the opportunity.
Deb Brinkman.
Hello, I live at 4327 Alabama Avenue South. As president of the League of Women Voters of St. Louis Park, I'd like to thank you for the time and effort you've invested into learning about ranked choice voting. I respectfully request that you give the City Council a positive recommendation so that they can move ahead with their approval. For 98 years, the League of Women Voters has been empowering voters and defending democracy by engaging all citizens and improving government. While our legislators deal with polarization and gridlock, adapting RCV is a change that we can make here in our community. Thanks to our charter commission, and legislation that allows the local control, we have the ability to drive positive change that voters want and deserve. You've heard many reasons why voters want ranked choice voting and the benefits that they want to experience. I hope you find their testimony as compelling as we do. Their comments explain why ranked choice voting has been endorsed by the League of Women Voters Minnesota, the League of Women Voters St. Louis Park, Senate District 46 DFL, and the St. Louis Park Human Rights Commission. I want to underscore one reason, which I really believe is the most essential, and that's to avoid the harmful effects of vote splitting and to ensure that winning candidates have the support of the majority of the voters. Nothing is more likely to threaten the legitimacy of our local democracy than by the prospect of candidates being elected by a mere minority of the voters. That said, we appreciate that change takes effort. Thankfully, we'll be able to learn from the experience in Minneapolis and St. Paul, and we're confident that a plan could be put together based upon their rich base of information to mitigate any concerns or possible complications. Exit polling shows that 92% of the voters in Minneapolis and 85% of the voters in St. Paul find ranked choice voting simple and easy to use. Those percentages continue to increase each year. Education plays a key role in those percentages. Please know that the League of Women Voters of St. Louis Park and Fair Vote Minnesota are committed to providing ongoing education at the grassroots level. You can expect to see us at many public events here around town, so stay tuned for those events. The first step begins with your positive recommendation to the City Council. Thank you again for your time, the hard work, consideration, and the importance of bringing ranked choice voting to St. Louis Park.
So that is all the cards I have. Is there anyone else in the audience that didn't get a chance to submit a card that would like to speak? No? Seeing none, I just want to thank everyone for taking the time to come out and sharing your thoughts on ranked choice voting with the Charter Commission. This has been a really good learning process as we've gone along this path. So your part in that is very important. So we really appreciate that. Thanks.